Hello. So far we've talked about how it is that I created the size and instantiated the inventory, and I also talked about how you can add items to the inventory. What we're going to talk about now is how to drag items around, and then also how to add items to the player so they instantiate on his person, and then he can move about. And they'll be attached to the skeleton. So that's what we're looking at now. Again, just a quick disclaimer, the logic of how this all works comes from Austin's Game Grind drag and drop inventory tutorial, but I've extended it quite a lot to allow for this sort of equipping behavior. So to see how this works, go to the item data script. And the item data script is, as we mentioned in the last tutorial, the item data script is attached to the item object, which we make the child of one of the slots. So let's do that right now. So you see we've got a brown pants slot, and the brown pants slot contains the brown pants item. This is the item game object, and it has this item data script, which stores a bunch of useful information, such as the slot location, which is really important. It stores, it knows who the player is, that you know, the player who owns this particular item, who knows who that is, and then it also has the item, which in this case is the brown pants, and from that we get a bunch of information about the item, like its name, ID, the slug, the item type, and so forth. So that's what we're referring to, and this is what has, so that's the item data script. And the item data script contains on it these methods, onBeginDrag, and what that does is it detects when the game object that this script is attached to is being dragged. OnDrag, it detects when the game object that this script here, item data, the script is attached to is being dragged around, and then onDrag it detects when the game object that the script is attached to has stopped being dragged. That's what these methods do, and to have these methods you need these interfaces here. So let's talk step by step what's going on here. This first line of code, what that's doing is it's setting a boolean in the selection manager to true, which means then and this one as well, both of these, when you've started dragging and when you're dragging this game object, then you can't make a box selection. So I'll show you what I mean by by just commenting those out to show you what happens if you don't have this boolean variable. So let's add some items, and I'm dragging around here, which is fine. The selection manager script has logic in there which stops you from drawing the box selection when you're over a UI element, but as soon as you go out of the UI element, aha, no, you're drawing this enormous box which looks like crap. So what you need to do is you need to set, as soon as you're dragging something, you need to set this boolean variable to true, and that will stop you from creating that box. Like this. See, now it's fine. Okay, next what we do, so let's have a look at this now. Now it checks to see if the item is null. I tried to think of why I put this there because I couldn't think of why the item would be null. Yeah, I just couldn't think of a situation where that would happen, but you know, I'll leave it there anyway just in case. Sometimes I do some coding months ago and then I forget why I put a certain line of code there, I delete it, and then I create all these problems. So I'm just going to leave it there. It can't hurt to have it there. Next, what we do is we have a look at this dragged item.name.contains item. Now, what is this dragged item? Well, let's have a look. This dragged item is this very game object. It's the very game object that this script is attached to. That's the dragged item. So just to be totally sure that you're getting this, the dragged item is this is the item game object that the item data script is attached to. The dragged item is this very game object. So that's the dragged item, the thing that I'm dragging around right now. Okay, so that's the dragged item. So it's checking to see, does the dragged item contain the word item? If so, then go to the parent and make its name empty slot. And let's look at that. Let's look at that condition. So, go to inventory. Does the dragged item contain the word item? Yes, if I drag this, it will be a dragged item that contains the word item. And then what, so look carefully at its parent. Its parent is the steel curious slot at the moment, but as soon as I drag it away, the parent will become the empty slot, which makes sense because this slot no longer contains a child. It no longer contains an item. But if I release it, it goes back to its original location. So that's what that line of code does. And then while you're dragging it around, so we'll on begin drag, what you want to do is then you've taken it from here, you've made the slot that it was originally called the empty slot, but then you set the parent to be the canvas. Now it's important that you do that, because if you don't, look what happens. Let's just comment that out. Okay, now I've no longer made it so that the parent of this item object, is the canvas. So now look, you see how it's going behind stuff? It's going behind those item objects, and it's going behind this entire panel, but it's going in front of these. Now the reason why that is that the way the canvas works is that it renders things first that are last on the list. It's the last child sort of thing. So this equipment panel will get rendered above everything else. And more to the point, within the equipment panel, these will get rendered first. So these are getting rendered first. So by making this item object a child of the canvas and not a child of the inventory, you'll make sure that this item is getting rendered above everything else. So that's what that line of code does. And have a careful look at the canvas now, and look what appears right down at the bottom. The black steel curious item, right? Because now that's been made a child of the canvas, and so now it's being rendered above everything without any problems there. Okay, next what we do is we make sure that the dragged item, that its blocks raycast, is set to false. And what that does is on the item object, so these guys, they have this component called canvas group. And in canvas group, they have this variable called blocks raycast. And what that means is there's a special raycast sent by the mouse which detects UI elements. And so that's why we can pick these up in the first place. But notice, oh, I didn't even grab that one. Okay. But see what happens to blocks raycast when I start dragging it. It's turned to false, right? And what that means is that while I'm dragging this, it's no longer detecting raycast from the mouse. And it's important that you do that, because if you don't do that, again, I'm showing you stuff line by line by breaking it and showing you what the result is. If you don't do that, then when you drag this item around, you kind of can't drop it or stuff anymore. So for instance, if I want to drop these, oh, this might work. No, I don't think so. If you want to drop these pants here, you see it doesn't go there anymore, even though it should, because it's not detecting this UI element anymore. It just keeps hitting the pants. The mouse is directly over the pants, and it just keeps hitting that. So it's no longer detecting places. It should go here to this slot, but it's not going to, because it can't detect that empty slot. So when you start dragging it, and while you're dragging it, you need to be sure that the blocks raycast is set to false. And that's it. On begin drag is done. Now on drag is even more straightforward. Well, we still want this to be true in the selection manager. We don't want to draw a selection box while we're dragging something around. And again, you check to see if item equals null. And then you just make the dragged item, its position, the same as the event data position. Now, what is event data? Event data records all the things that the mouse is doing. I'm pretty sure that's what it is anyway. So like its position, what it's clicking, what it's doing, all that sort of stuff. So that's what we're basically doing here. So making sure that the dragged item transformative position is the same as the mouse position, basically. And that's that method. Right, but this is where most of the insane coding happens. So let's talk about this one step by step. This is the on-end drag. So first of all, we set that Boolean variable in the selection manager to false, because we want to be able to select things now. If it was true, we'd never be able to select anything. So we have to turn that to false again. And then we go to this thing called the hit object. And the hit object refers to the event data pointer current raycast dot game object. So what is that? Let's demonstrate this through debugs. Hit object. In short, this is what you're raycasting and hitting, the UI elements that you're hitting with the mouse. But I need to show you an important bug here that you need to control for. Okay, so let's say we're dragging something around and we land here. And you can see what we've got is debug empty slot. I should probably have done... And then you're dragging it around and you hit here, is text, because we've hit the text component of this info panel. But if we go, so we go here, we'll get text as well. So we've got text again. Let's not collapse that. But if we go a little bit further down, we get adventure. So that's the name of this game object here, this UI element, right? So it's basically here we should get character. That's character. This game object is the character. And here we should get chest, right? And head, and finally legs. And it's going to stay there this time. So it tells you what game object you're hitting in the world, but not just any game object, a UI element. It doesn't work if you, like normally raycasting, you can hit things in the world, right? Rocks and trees and humans and stuff. But this raycasting doesn't work like that. It just hits UI elements. So if you drag it out here, it's getting null. Okay, that's no worries. We'll see it's getting null. It's not hitting anything. So normally with the raycasting, I'd be getting like unit, I'd be getting tree, I'd be getting rock, I'd be getting ground, all that sort of thing. But in this case, it's just null, 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 because all it's doing is detecting UI elements. Now, if you were to go hit object dot name, then you'll get an error. It'll be fine for when you're hitting these sorts of things like legs, the same as before, right? No worries. Head, character, info panel, adventure, text, that sort of thing, that's fine. If you go out here, you get this null reference. Because no null objects don't have any qualities, they don't have any features like names or anything like that. So if you're trying to find the name of a null object, you're going to get this error. So what we have to do first is we check to see if the hit object is null. If the hit object is null, then send it back to its original position. So you hit nothing, go back. Now how does that method work? The way this method works, send dragged item to original position, is first it checks the name of the dragged item to see if it contains the word item. So here, it would. In this case, it will contain the word item. And then what it does in that situation is it sets the parent of the object back to the slot which it originally came from. And the way that we know which slot that it originally came from is this slot location hasn't changed while we're dragging it around. It doesn't change at all. So all we have to do is make the parent the slot in the list of inventory slots, that slot location index, and it will take us back there. If that doesn't make sense, run through and debug, or have a look at this. So look at this one here. The slot location is currently 0 on this object we're about to drag around, and it's still 0. So when we let go of it, all we have to do is put 0, that slot location, into the slot list, into the list of slots, and it will go to that index, which here is right there. Then we also change the name of the slot back to the item that it contains plus the word slot, and it's done. The other possibility is that the item contains the word equipped, and that's in this case. So you have a look, this item contains the word equipped, and it's not stored there, it's stored in the equipment panel. This contains the word equipped, and so what that does is it sends the item back to this equipment slot here, which is stored there, which in this case is head. In this case, it will be going back to the equipment slot called legs, and if there was something for the torso, it will be going back to the equipment slot called chest, because that's what's stored there. Now, if you hit something which is not null, it means you've hit some sort of UI element, and we need to know exactly what we've hit, and then what we're going to do based on that situation. So in this case, we're seeing if we've hit something which contains the word slot, but doesn't hit the word, something which contains the word panel. So I'll give you an example of that. Right, so we've hit something which contains the word slot. So this is it, empty slot, right? It contains the word slot, but it doesn't contain the word panel. Like if I drop it there, it's hit something called slot panel, right? So we only want something which just contains the word slot and doesn't contain the word slot and the word panel. And in this case, what's happened, and the thing that we've hit, just to be sure that it makes sense, is we've hit one of these empty slots here, which it says right there, right? We've hit an empty slot. And in this situation, what you can see is going on is that we're changing the position of the item in the list of slots. We're also changing the position of the item in the list of items. If you have a look at them both happening simultaneously, so the list of items, this now is at index 6 here. And I'm going to move it to index 7. Right, so it's gone up to index 7 in there, but it's also gone to index 7 in the slot list. So they get moved to exactly the same index every single time, and that's why slot location will tell you both the location in the item list and also in the slot list. Now this line of code is necessary when we have multiple inventories and we need to check if the inventory we're dealing with is indeed the player inventory and not some other inventory. So then we check, so then it says like has the condition for if you're hitting some different inventory. But we're not going to deal with that right now. So have a look at this code. If I go through it line by line, I get a bit muddled up trying to explain it verbally. I obviously understand how it works. I wrote this stuff, but it's quite hard to verbally explain because I keep using the same words like slot location, and then I keep, it's kind of difficult. But try and go through line by line. If you can't work it out by this, then I'll ask a question in the comments and I'll try and explain it there. Might be easier that way. So the next situation we have to deal with is that if we hit something called item, right? So then we're going to hit something called item, have a look. Then we want to swap them over. So I just hit something that contains the word item. And when that happens, you swap the two around. And again, this is checking to see if we're in the same inventory. You don't need to worry about this yet. And this code is responsible for swapping the items around. Go through here line by line, use debugs, and hopefully it should make sense to you. Now, the next situation we have to deal with, if the hit object.name is the same thing as the item type of the item. Right, what the hell does that mean? Let's have a look. These UI elements here are called, the names of those UI elements are exactly the same thing as the item types. So at the moment we have an item type called chest, an item type called legs, and an item type called head. There'll be lots of different things in head, lots of different items in chest, lots of different items in legs, but they'll all be the same, have the same item type. So I called these UI elements after these item types. So if you have a look at just a black helmet, right, and you go into the item, its item type is head. So what it's finding out is that if the thing that we're hitting, if the name of it is exactly the same as the item type of the dragged item, then do that. So that's how that works. Same there. This UI element is called chest, and the thing that I'm dragging around now, the item type is also chest, and so they match, and so it goes in there, and the same with the legs. So that's what this code does. And then it also checks, it also wants to make sure that the dragged item.name does not contain the word equipped. If it contains the word equipped, then it is an equipped item. So these items here, see that it contains the word equipped. The next scenario is that if the hit object contains the word equipped and the hit object item data. Right, so what this is finding out is that if you've hit something called equipped, let's get some more objects in here so it's more apparent. You've hit something called equipped, so you've hit this, like let's say you got these legs and you hit that. You just hit these brown pants, they used to be brown pants, and they were called equipped. And so in that situation, and also the dragged item type is legs, and you're hitting this object, and the item type of this object is also legs. So in that situation, you swap them around. You're hitting something with the word equipped in it, and the item type is the same as the item type of the dragged item, and then you swap them around. You can see why it's so difficult to explain this code, because there's so many similar words, and I just keep thinking that ultimately the best way for you to understand this is for you to go through it yourself. So I'll just quickly finish up, and then I encourage you to go through here line by line and try and debug it, because trying to explain this verbally is driving me a little bit insane. You're watching this video now, but I assure you this is not the only video I've made in an attempt to try and explain these concepts. Many have ended up in the trash can. And that's basically the final situation. Then of course you get else send back to the original position, because in that case you're not hitting one of these guys, you're not hitting one of these, you're not hitting an empty slot, you're just hitting something which we don't care about, like this UI element or that or this. It's not null, but it's not something we care about or is going to affect anything in any way. Okay, so this definitely wasn't my best tutorial. I did really struggle to explain what was going on. So give it a shot, try your best to see what's happening. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how we actually add the items to the character, so you can see it at runtime on the character attached to the skeleton. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you next time.